Hi everyone, I'm Abigail. I'm here to talk about photography, how I relate to it, and how I can help you get those incredible photos that you absolutely love. Now, taking photos is a vulnerable process, and that's kind of what I want to dive into today. Art requires your vulnerability, and as photography is art, it requires you to be vulnerable. In a previous video, I spoke about how photography, and specifically doing a professional photo shoot, is the perfect way to engage with creativity and art while having minimal effort that you need to put in. You are able to create something without worrying about much of the details, and you will have someone there to guide you every step of the way, making it hassle-free, worry-free, and really just a place and an environment that you can relax in while doing something that in your ordinary everyday life you may not be doing, which is creating art. And this is such a great opportunity, and I talked more and more about it, but there was one thing that I didn't specifically mention and I didn't go into much detail about, and that is how art requires your vulnerability. And even if you're doing this photo shoot and engaging with art in this way, there is still very, very much an element of vulnerability which it will require of you. And I think this is one of the biggest parts of what scares so many people stepping into that environment of doing a photo shoot is they feel very vulnerable. So I want to dive into how you can feel less vulnerable, why feeling vulnerable is not a bad thing, and just how it all relates to each other. So why is it that art requires so much vulnerability from us? Why is it that the most incredible art is, in my opinion, often the most vulnerable art? I think so many times we quickly and easily praise celebrities and public figures or artists or for being vulnerable, and we like to talk about how raw or how vulnerable their artwork is, but then when it comes to our own lives, we are very, very scared to step anywhere near a place of vulnerability, and we want to stay safe and we want to stay protected, and that's a very natural instinct. One of the things that I've noticed in recent years, and a lot of people have spoken out about this, and I think it's a common complaint which has come up, is how music all sounds the same. Every single song is the same, and it started with all pop music is the same, all pop music sounds the same, all pop music is talking about the same issues, all pop music is singing the same lyrics, you just tweak it a little bit. But what's become an even bigger issue in recent years, specifically in the last few years, is that all music genres are slowly beginning to merge. In the modern music industry, pop music sounds more and more the same as country music, and country music sounds more and more the same as rock music, and rock music sounds more and more the same as hip-hop music, and everything is kind of starting to blend together, and it all sounds the same, and there's no longer this distinctness in any music genre, and it's something that I hear people talk about a lot, and I personally am not happy about it either. I love when there's originality, when there is uniqueness in music. And what people maybe may not realize is what we are craving when it comes to this art form, modern music. We are craving authenticity and we are craving vulnerability. So when you look at the music that all sounds the same, that is just industry music, everyone's copying each other, but in order for music to sound unique, in order for music to be different, the artist needs to be vulnerable. And that's a very scary place to be in, and especially when an industry such as the music industry starts to all merge together, it becomes even harder to be that vulnerable in the face of everyone else being the same. But it is so crucial to creating art is to be vulnerable. And if you think about your favorite artists, let's just say musicians, and you think about your favorite songs, they're unique because they are vulnerable. And if you enjoy unique music and you really love a certain artist, you'll know the backstory to that song, you'll know the backstory to that album, you'll know where they were coming from. And that's why artists do things like interviews and go on talk shows and talk about where this album's coming from. And it's all from a place of vulnerability. It's from a place of opening up and allowing people to look into their lives. So the greatest art, the best art, I believe, comes from a place of vulnerability. And that doesn't mean that it's a place where you're going to get backlash or a place where you're going to get hurt. It just means that you're opening yourself up in a way that most people might not open up in an ordinary day. And I personally have been thinking a lot about vulnerability and my own art, and also stepping into different forms of art and things beyond photography, and stuff that I've done in the past, where it's things like writing poetry or writing books or videography or writing a script. Any of these things that I've done bits and pieces of in the past require different levels of vulnerability and openness. But at the very, very base of all art, if you ever want to create any art form, the very minimum amount of vulnerability that is required of you to do that is taking something that you've made, something that means something to you, that you hopefully really love, something you've poured your energy and your effort into, even if it's a small amount of effort, and placing that in front of somebody else, anybody. And in that act, you open yourself up to criticism, to rejection. And at the very base, before even opening up your emotions, before explaining to somebody the backstory behind it, at the very base of that, and you see so many celebrities speak about this when they have art that they put out, whether it's an actor in a movie or a director or an artist that made a new album, and if that is not received well by their fans, it's a very challenging situation for them. And the more popular you become, the more hate you begin to receive, just because of sheer numbers. And so the more you put your art out there, the more you will get negative feedback. And I'm not saying that the majority of your feedback will be negative, but let's say you've got 100 people looking at a painting, and 1% of those people absolutely hates your painting. That's one person. But if you had 1,000 people looking at your painting and 1% hated your painting, that's 10 people. So the more people interact with your art, the more people will criticize it. Not the majority. Hopefully the majority loves it. But I'm going very in depth there, and that's not the point. Art requires your vulnerability. And so I still stand by it. I think that if you want to engage in art and creativity, one of the best ways you can do that is through photography, through observing photography, through booking a photo shoot, through being part of that process. And it can really open up your creative eye, your creative mind, and it's an amazing experience. But I think one of the biggest reasons why people don't do that, why they're afraid to get in front of a camera, and so many people are camera shy, is because it's a very vulnerable position to put yourself in. It is a permanent record of what you look like. And no matter who you are, no matter how confident you are, we all have things about our physical appearance that we're either insecure about or we absolutely hate. And that sounds very harsh, but there are so many people who look at themselves and they're like, I just don't like what I look like. Or there's very specific things. It can be having a good side and a bad side. By the way, that is a thing. It doesn't mean that your bad side looks terrible, but human beings are asymmetrical, which means different sides of your face and different sides of your body do look different. So if you feel like you have a better side, it might very well be true that you do have a better side. So please, tell your photographer, this is my good side, and if you're comfortable with having photos taken rather on one side than the other, then please do that. So I'm not trying to shame anybody for having certain insecurities, but the fact is that we do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it makes it difficult for us to get in front of a camera. It makes it difficult for us to allow other people to see us in that way. And so taking a photo, although it can be an incredible experience, is a very humbling sometimes experience, and in all cases, a very vulnerable experience. So I think that yes, although I would highly recommend for anyone and everyone to book a photo shoot at least once and hopefully multiple times, do this again and again, I acknowledge that it is scary, and I acknowledge that you will have to be vulnerable. But what I want to tell you is that the more vulnerable that you are in the right environment, and I will get into that, but the more vulnerable that you are, the more authentic and the more meaningful the art that you will be able to create. So don't allow vulnerability to scare you away from this opportunity to create something absolutely iconic, beautiful, and meaningful beyond all else. So what is it that you can do to make yourself feel more safe in this position of vulnerability? And first, I just want to go into talking about what is vulnerability without going into too much detail or too deeply into it. A lot of people mistake vulnerability for being in danger, and that is not the same thing. Vulnerability means you open yourself up to something. To take a very simple example of explaining vulnerability, if you have any sort of vehicle, or taking it back to like Middle Ages, or any kind of war machine, or let's say it's a knight in armor. If the knight is covered completely in armor, then they have no vulnerability. They are invulnerable, which means that there is no way that you can get to them. They're completely covered, they're perfectly safe, as we would think it. And so every time you take a piece of that armor off, that part of their body becomes vulnerable. Let's say you take everything off the one arm, then that arm is vulnerable, but the other arm is covered in armor. And so that is what vulnerability means. And if you're in a dangerous situation, you don't want to be vulnerable. Let's say you're in the middle of the battle, this knight is in the middle of the battle, they don't want their arm to be exposed. That can be very, very dangerous for them. So they completely cover themselves and they make sure that they are invulnerable. However, if let's say they've won this battle and they're having a victory celebration, it would be ridiculous for them to walk around with all of their armor on because they're so scared. They've won. They're safe. There is no threat, no current threat to that knight, which means they take off all of their armor, not just pieces of it, but all of their armor. So they become incredibly vulnerable, but they're in a safe environment. And the same goes for creating any kind of art. And specifically, if you're looking at creating art through photography, and you're trying to step into this from the perspective of having a photographer take your photos, working with a professional that knows what they're doing, what you can do to make that process of being vulnerable much, much more comfortable for you is finding the right photographer, finding the right environment where you can be safe in the environment, which means you can allow yourself to be vulnerable without being in danger. And so specifically, some of the things that I think are very important in doing this is finding a photographer that has a style that you like. Hopefully it's a style you absolutely love, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be a perfectionist about it. Just find someone that if you look at their photos, you're like, I like the look of those photos. I like the way they edit their photos. I like the way they shoot their photos. Are you somebody who prefers more of a casual session, which is more candid photos? Do you prefer someone who's more posed, etc.? Then secondly, finding yourself a environment physically where you will take the photos that you are comfortable with. Do you prefer an outdoor shoot? Do you prefer a studio shoot? Would you rather be in your home? And I've made some videos about these things also before, discussing what you might be most comfortable with. So look at that and find yourself a photographer you're comfortable with, find yourself an environment you're comfortable with, Another thing you can do is, if you're not comfortable being in front of the camera alone, find yourself someone to go with you. And not someone that's going to stand with a photographer and just watch and cheer you on, but someone who's going to be in the photos with you. This might be a significant other. This might be your children. If you are a parent, this might be your siblings. If you have siblings that you really have a nice, close relationship with. It could be something as simple as taking a friend with you. It could be your best friend. It could be a group of friends. It could be someone that you just want to spend more time with and you're looking for a fun activity to do together. It doesn't have to be anyone specific or even anyone seriously significant in your life, but just someone who's willing to step into that vulnerability with you and someone that you trust to be in that space with you so that both of you can be more comfortable. I always find it's much, much easier to do a photo shoot when you are actually interacting with somebody else. You have someone to bounce your ideas off of, your movements, someone to have their energy flow into your energy and just move together. Can be really a relaxing environment for you. So, pick your photographer, pick your location. Don't have to, but you can find some people or somebody to go with you and to do this photo shoot. Then make sure that you dress in a way that you find comfortable. Don't place any expectations on yourself that you have to look a certain way or that you have to dress a certain way. Dress in a way that makes you feel comfortable and you feel natural so that you don't have to worry about that when you're in front of the camera. So even though it is a very vulnerable situation, it doesn't have to be a dangerous situation. And don't get those two things mixed up. And then that's while you're in the photo shoot, that is how you can prepare for it. That is how you can go and take these steps so that the process of creating this art is as comfortable and as relaxing as you possibly can, that you can step into that vulnerability while still feeling safe. And once you've got those photos, the question is, how are you going to use them? What are you going to do with them? And this can be equally, if not more, vulnerable to some people than actually doing the photo shoot. You might be someone who's very comfortable sharing your photos online, in your home, printing them out, or you could be someone who's really shy and doesn't want to do these things. I would challenge you that if you're not entirely comfortable with this, find a low-risk way in which to step into it. Because I think that art finds some of its meaning in being shared. Not all of its meaning. I don't think art requires being shared to be art, but I think it increases its meaning the more people you are able to share it with. And if you have taken these photos, that should be something that you are proud of. No matter how little effort you felt like you put into it, simply the bravery of stepping into that and allowing yourself to be captured, you being a work of art in and of yourself, you should be proud to want to share that with people. So whether you put it on your walls, put it on your social media, just put it in a photo album and have it in your living room where you put it on your coffee table and people can look at it. It doesn't really matter to what degree you do it. Do it to the degree that feels right for you, but I challenge you to definitely share that with someone. And if you are someone who is very comfortable sharing your photos, let's say online, or putting them on the walls, what I would challenge you to do is to share it in an unusual way. To do something, not necessarily something that might look egotistical, I mean, if you feel like it, you're welcome to, but doing something that expresses your personality in a unique way. And why I suggest this is, if you're used to just always sharing your photos on, let's say, Facebook or Instagram, or you're always going to put it in a photo album, or you're always going to make a Christmas card out of it and send it to your friends, doing something which is out of the ordinary stretches your creative muscle, and it allows you the opportunity to create more art than what you're used to. And it's that thing of taking steps and building a momentum into a direction that maybe lead to something completely different that you never expected, and allows you again to create more and more art, bringing more and more meaning into your life. And I don't know what that would look like to you, but it can be things like creating a scrapbook, or maybe you want to do something interesting and unique by printing the pictures on a t-shirt or make a blanket out of it. That one's more of a goofy thing. I don't think that would be super serious, but I know a lot of people might find it fun to print a picture of themselves on a blanket and give it to a friend or a significant other almost as a joke. And I think that even though if you see these things as a little bit of a joke or a little bit cheeky, it can still be a really cool expression of art. So don't underestimate things just because they're a little cheeky or a little tongue-in-cheek that you're gonna do this thing. It can still be art. And so allow yourself the freedom to express whatever you're feeling and use that photo shoot as inspiration to further your creativity even beyond that. And don't be afraid of vulnerability. Allow yourself to step into safe environments in a vulnerable way and grow through that experience. So I hope this inspires you. I feel inspired. But I hope this inspires you, and I hope this takes you one step closer to creating more and more meaningful art in your life, whether that is through photography or through something else. Really just finding ways of expressing yourself. And if you ever feel like you're in a slump, you know this is an easy way to go back to finding ways of being creative. And more I see photographers, and I love doing this, taking people and being creative with them on the photo shoot rather than just doing very simple pictures, stepping into an environment that is unique to that person and really creating art out of that uniqueness that each of us has.